So here's an update on my Baldo project. This is the first set of cuttings I took, which are now 26 days old. And then over here are the 2 additional cuttings I took of suckers coming up out of the ground beside the tree. And these suckers were a good 18 inches tall, plus the roots, or plus the part underground. Not roots, but it's an underground stem. So I had to put them in these baskets. Put the baskets like on their side. And even then they wouldn't fit. They were sticking up above the baskets in a sideways position, so I put this 3rd basket on top to keep it from touching the plant, keep the plastic off the plants, and yet keep them enveloped in plastic so that they won't dry out. And this has been very successful so far, because I haven't, well, I have had, the day that I transplanted these into sand, which was yesterday, this one here was wilting. Its stem was curving down, which was worrisome because I was afraid it had an embolism, an air embolism, which can kill the plant. But I sort of stuck it up between these pieces of the wire basket, and it looks like the curve or the wilting is gone, and it's standing upright again, which is very good, very encouraging. And I used the same method on these as I did for the cuttings over here, which was I basically scraped the bottom part of the stem, like the last inch or 2, and that's supposed to stimulate the production of roots. It disturbs the cells so that they might start producing roots, or might kind of mutate into roots. And I stuck them in honey, and then rooting hormone powder, and then I put them down in the sand. And this time I really flushed the sand very, very well. I flushed it several times and poured off what appeared to be this silt, because the other set that I made, these over here, when I poured the water through, or poured the water out of the containers, out of the drip pans, it smelled salty, so I was afraid I hadn't flushed the sand enough. So I did it this time on these. I really made sure that there wasn't any apparent cloudiness in the water. I kept flooding it until the drainage water was clear and didn't smell like salt anymore, because this sand came from the ocean beach. So the unique thing about these is that they're so tall to begin with. The part above ground is 18 inches at least, and these are considered pretty good size trees actually. they may be as old as 2 years old from having sat out there in the wind all that time. And they're actually hard to handle because they're so tall, because of the way I had to do the baskets. It was a little more complicated, but the problem is the alternative was to cut them in half. And for example, this one in the back has so few leaves to begin with. I guess because it was so windy, windswept, and probably the insects were hard on the plant. So it doesn't have a lot of leaves left on the lower part. And then I wasn't sure about the survivability of the upper part either. On this one, the upper part was really subject to wilting, and I didn't want to risk cutting it off. And if I had cut it, say here, about here, there would have only been 2 leaves left. Well, 2 large leaves and a couple little ones below that. And then, like I said, I don't think the chances of this top part surviving were particularly good. But it does seem like the whole thing might have a good chance of surviving, because it is so strong looking, and it's, like I said, it's probably up to a couple years old, and it is actually, or was standing in an independent position as if it were a little tree. So as opposed to these over here, which were clippings off the branches of a tree and have to actually adapt, these have to actually adapt to being separate trees when and if they root. These over here, in a sense, are used to being self-standing, independent trees, although not really independent completely, because they were attached to the trunk of the mother tree underground, or attached to the main root of the mother tree underground. And this one over here on the right hand side, the far right there, is also one of the suckers that were actually sticking out of the ground. And then this one beside it, I actually took it because it looked like new growth similar to the sucker, and it also is subject to wilting. I've had to spray the leaves and be careful to keep it covered, because it'll droop over very easily, or the leaves will droop very easily. And then there's one here, this one over here on the far left hand side. It's had typically droopy leaves and slightly discolored brownish looking leaves, but I think it was always like that. I think it came off the tree like that, so it's just the way the leaves were, and it's probably, these leaves were older. They had been on the tree a longer time and were due to fall off. This one on the left here actually had some fresh green growth on the very tip, which you see now is very bare. It had leaves at the top, fresh green leaves that were actually, they became wilted and died, basically fell off. So that's why I was afraid that this one might do the same thing. This young green one over here. But the reason I was hopeful about, the reason I took that one as a new cutting is that the younger growth may be more vigorous. There are some advantages to having the younger growth cuttings. New growth is considered to be more vigorous, but you also want to have an established piece so that it's firm enough to not just wilt and die. So that's why they say, or I've read, that the ideal cutting is on what's called semi-ripe wood, semi-ripe twigs. And I think that these meet that description. Although these actually look quite, like I said, quite established, almost as independent little trees, even though they don't have any roots. It was just an underground stem connected to the mother's main root. And when I pulled it up, it actually just snapped off as if it broke off a piece of the wood of the trunk of the tree. Although one of them had it looked like it had begun to grow little roots sometime in the past, but they didn't look particularly fresh or alive. They looked kind of dried up and dead. But apparently it does have the ability to root, so we'll see. We'll just have to see how it goes. And that is my update for August 1st, 2013.